To the urgent question, where I call upon Bambos Charlams.
To ask the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs if she will make a statement on the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom Government was shocked to hear of the very sad death of the respected and renowned journalist Shireen Abu Akleh whilst working in the West Bank. On the 11th of May, the Foreign Secretary and UK ministers made clear our concern, and we have called for a thorough investigation into the events. On the 13th of May, in company with the other members of the UN Security Council, we strongly condemned the killing and stressed the importance of an immediate, thorough, transparent, fair and impartial investigation, and stressed the need to ensure accountability. The work of journalists across the globe is vital, and they must be protected to carry out their work and defend media freedom. We were also deeply distressed by the scenes at the funeral of Shireen Abu Akleh on Friday. Her death was a tragedy, and those mourning must be treated with respect and dignity. The situation on the ground makes clear the need to make progress towards a peaceful two-state solution, and the UK stands ready to support.
We now go to Bambos Charlams.
Shireen Abu Akleh was a veteran correspondent for Al Jazeera's Arabic news channel, and on Wednesday the 11th of May she was killed while covering Israeli army raids in the city of Jenin in the northern occupied West Bank. Her killing has been widely condemned by world leaders, the UN and members of civil society, and it has shocked the world. The killing of Shireen Abu Akleh is not only an outrageous act, but an attack on the freedom of the media and the independence of journalists working around the world, playing a crucial role in reporting conflicts, seeking truth and telling stories of those affected. On Friday, deeply disturbing footage was released following Shireen's funeral. The scenes of violence at the funeral were appalling, and Israeli police were seen firing tear gas at mourners and attacking them with batons, almost causing the pallbearers to drop the coffin, nearly sending it crashing to the ground. The attacks on mourners were indefensible and only heightened demands for justice and pain felt by Shireen's family. The Labour Party unequivocally condemns the violence by Israeli forces. International law and human rights must be upheld, and we stand with all those demanding accountability for the killing of Shireen, and there must be an urgent, independent and impartial inquiry to secure this. More widely, we will continue to support justice and the protection of human rights of Palestinian people and a sovereign Palestinian state alongside a secure Israel. Tensions in the region were already high. Israel has seen a number of deadly terrorist attacks, and both Israelis and Palestinians have been killed in what has been the worst wave of violence and attacks in Israel in years. We're deeply concerned that Shireen's death and the treatment of mourners at her funeral could spark further cycles of violence. So I therefore ask the Minister whether she has made any representations to her Israeli counterparts on the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, whether the Minister will condemn the violence at Shireen's funeral, and finally whether she can confirm whether her department will stand up for international law and human rights by encouraging an independent inquiry to the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh so that we can ensure that there is accountability for her death.
Minister.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments. He's absolutely right that Shireen's death was outrageous and shocked the world. And he's also right to speak about the very disturbing scenes at her funeral. It is so important that mourners are paid respect, that they're paid dignity, and actually that the deceased is shown respect and shown dignity. And this was immediately called out over the weekend also by my co-minister, Lord Ahmed, who was immediately stated about this. He's asked about the investigation, and what we're doing is working with other members at the UN Security Council to give that very firm statement that we want this investigation. It needs to be immediate, it needs to be thorough, and also, crucially, it needs to be impartial. Thank you very much.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the answer to the urgent question. Clearly, there is a concern that we don't know exactly what happened on that terrible day when the journalist was killed. Does my honourable friend agree with me that we do need an independent investigation in which both the Government of Israel and the Palestinian Authority cooperate so that there is a full and thorough investigation which can be seen to be independent? And does she regret the fact that the Palestinian Authority are refusing to hand over the bullet that killed the journalist?
Minister.
My honourable friend, as ever, is so right. It is absolutely key that this investigation happens swiftly, that it is thorough and that it is impartial.
SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we on these benches unequivocally condemn the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, one of the Arab world's most respected journalists, shot dead by the Israeli army despite wearing full press coverings, body armour and a helmet. Shireen's death takes to 50 the number of journalists who have been killed by the Israeli occupation forces in the last 20 years, death for which no one has ever been held to account. It is absolutely essential, therefore, that along with the EU and the United States and the UN, that all democracies unreservedly condemn this killing, and all who support a full, impartial and transparent investigation must be supported. Does she agree that this investigation should be carried out by the International Criminal Court, so that the person responsible for this awful crime can be found and tried, and if convicted, given an appropriate sentence? And what sanction does she think would be appropriate against Israel in those circumstances? And finally, will she also unreservedly condemn the disgraceful actions of the Israeli police, who on Friday attacked her cortege with batons and stun grenades, denying her, even in death, any sort of dignity or respect?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that the killing has been condemned across the world, and indeed it has been condemned by us in the UK. We have called, as I said before, for that immediate, thorough, transparent, fair and impartial investigation. I think it's really important that that happens soon, and it happens in a way that is very, very thorough. I think we were all also completely shocked by the scenes at her funeral. We are deeply concerned about the rise in violence attacks in the area, and continue to call for peace in the area, as we have always done so. Working to deliver peace is our absolute top priority. But she was an incredibly respected journalist. He's right also to point to the risks to journalists across the world. And in fact, I believe that 26 journalists have been killed across the world during this year, 6 in Ukraine. It may even be more since that update I received. We must stand for journalists and for media freedom.
Andrew Jones.
David Jones. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is entirely right to express concern over the scenes at the funeral of Shireen Abu Akleh. But given that there can be absolutely no doubt as to what happened at that funeral, given that mourners and pallbearers were attacked by Israeli soldiers, police officers, can she confirm that the government has already made representations to the Israeli authorities expressing concern and indicating how deplorable those scenes are?
Minister.
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the deplorable scenes. We've already stated that we are deeply disturbed by those scenes. We're also looking at what other further measures might be taken, but most importantly, we continue to call for urgent steps to de-escalate tensions and for the restraint and the use of force. It is absolutely vital that tensions are reduced and we get parties back to dialogue to work towards peace.
Just help each other by trying to be brief, because we've major pressures afterwards, but I understand the feeling within. I'm now going to the others that put in for UQ, who unfortunately wasn't taken. Naz Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all send my condolences to the family and friends of Shireen Abu Akleh, the true Palestinian heroine who was horrifically shot in the head and murdered? And let's be clear, this is not a one-off attack on journalists or by Israel. We can't forget that Israel actually had a raid last May on the Al Jalal building that hosted Al Jazeera and Associated Press office. And this isn't just a story of Shireen either, but many other journalists, including the 55 Palestinian journalists killed since 2000. And how can the Palestinians have any faith in Israel to hand over a bullet and this so-called, this whitewash of an idea that they're going to investigate when nobody has been held to account over lots and lots of years? So what representations is the Minister making and this government making to his Israeli counterparts to actually make sure we get justice on this occasion, not just for Shireen, but all the Palestinians who are continually being brutalised?
The UK is very concerned by the number of Palestinians who've been killed by Israeli security forces in recent weeks. We continue to urge for thorough and transparent investigations into the deaths of Palestinian civilians and call again for restraint in the use of force.
Robert Halford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is my honourable friend aware that also 19 Israelis have been killed, not including foreign nationals, have been killed from terrorism since March the 21st, and Jewish lives and Israeli lives matter as much as the life of the journalist who tragically lost her life? And is she also aware that the Hamas leader recently incited the Palestinians to act in ways of terrorism, inciting the use of the knife and the gun? And what is she doing to help the Israelis combat terrorism and these awful murders against Israeli citizens?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is an important point. Israel does have a legitimate right to self-defence and the right to defend its citizens from attack. But it is absolutely vital that all actions are proportionate and that they are in line with international humanitarian law, and they must make every effort to avoid civilian casualties.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to send my condolences to Shireen's family, friends and colleagues at Al Jazeera. She was unlawfully killed while doing the job she loved and greatly respected for, while clearly identified as a journalist in what can only be described as a targeted attack for reporting actions of Israeli forces in the occupied territory of Jenin. Does the Minister agree with me that an international criminal court should undertake a full, independent, not impartial investigation and swift action taken to bring those responsible to action? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Can I thank the honourable member for reminding us that there are family and friends here, and I'd also like to add my condolences and the government's condolences to the family and friends of Shireen. Losing such a talented person in such awful situation, my thoughts are with them. We have called for the immediate investigation. That does need to be thorough, that does need to be impartial, because it needs to have the trust of all those in the area, and that's why it is so important that it happens soon.
Crispin Blood.
Speaker, I draw the attention of the House to my declaration in the Register as a founder director of the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians. In respect of this, since then I have avoided engagement on Palestinian issues in this House. But this opposition urgent question, in respect of the killing of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, almost certainly by targeted shot coming from the forces who are in illegal occupation of Palestinian territory, allow me to ask, how long must we wait for the United Kingdom to actually do anything to enforce accountability for the State of Israel on its gross and worsening breach of 55 years of the Fourth Geneva Convention, noting the shaming contrast with our own brave and principled policy towards Ukraine?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is right to be concerned. The UK government is very concerned about this very fragile security situation in Jerusalem. We continue to call on all parties to de-escalate tensions. The British ambassador to Israel and the British Consul General in Jerusalem have been engaging with Israeli and Palestinian leaderships to support them in restoring calm. We've made it clear that there's a need to protect holy sites. This sort of horrific violence against civilians is truly contemptible, and we absolutely call on all sides to de-escalate the situation and come to the dialogue tables and work towards peace.
Steve McCabe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I acknowledge my role as Chair of Labour Friends of Israel. Mr. Speaker, the killing and the events at the funeral are shocking by any standards. I absolutely condemn what happened at the funeral. But as I understand it, she was killed during a gun battle. The facts have not yet been established. The Palestinians have rejected an offer of a joint investigation with the Israelis. Now, surely in this place it helps no one to state as fact what people might want or feel inclined to believe. Can I ask the Minister to do everything in offering British resources and assistance to ensure an independent, impartial investigation is established and that we participate in it if that would be helpful?
Can I thank you for his question? We're also not only calling for that investigation, but also working with other members of the UN Security Council on that joint statement. So it's a joint statement from countries all around the world, strongly condemning the killing and stressing the importance of the investigation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Shireen Abu Akleh has been referred to as the voice of events in Palestine as part of a much-needed open and free press. But there are fears that their killing will spark refreshed conflict in the West Bank. Can my friend assure me that assure this House that if anything can come from this tragedy, that it's the government's priority to secure peace in this region?
Minister.
Our priority in this region has always been to work towards peace. That is why it's absolutely vital that tensions are de-escalated now. That is what we are urging the authorities to do on the ground, de-escalate and come back to dialogue and work towards peace.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I acknowledge my role as Chair of LFPME and the Britain-Palestine APPG. Can the Minister state exactly how the British Government are intending to support an impartial investigation which needs to be independent, as we don't, as a country, this Government has a poor track record on impartial investigations, including the jurisdiction of the ICC, in which the Prime Minister opposed, as well as the UN Commission of Inquiry report on Gaza, from which the UK abstained?
Minister.
So can I thank her for her question? You know, the immediate actions we've been taken are first of all to condemn the situation ourselves and then work with the UN Security Council for that joint statement, both of condemnation but also calling for the investigation. We're obviously using our own diplomatic links, both in Israel and in Jerusalem, engaging with the leaderships, and of course we will always look at what further measures should be taken.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is right to condemn the recent terror attacks on innocent Israelis, which are increasingly being directed from the West Bank by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. She's also right to condemn this killing and to express her belief, which we all share, that journalists should be allowed to report anywhere safely. However, there are too many people who, for whatever reason, sinister or other, who have already determined what the facts are and had done as soon as this story broke. So can I urge you once again to ensure that the UK Government's position continues to be in support of an independent inquiry, and that any inquiry to be worth anything at all is going to require the buy-in of both the Israeli Government or the Palestinian Authority, or else it will simply become a political dividing line.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think this is precisely why it is so important that the UN Security Council has described in such detail the need for the investigation to be immediate, thorough, transparent, fair, as well as impartial, and made all of those points about this investigation.
Leila Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shireen Abu Akleh was a Christian Palestinian like my family. Her death feels like we've lost a sister. The scenes from the funeral were deeply upsetting, but the Minister may be aware the Israeli police were trying to segregate the Christians from the Muslims in their mourning, and indeed the day before had stormed Shireen's house, went in, disturbed the wake, and took a Palestinian flag from their room. It's disgraceful. It's a clear provocation. And I ask the Minister simply this: has she summoned the Israeli ambassador to make clear how unhelpful to the peace process this is?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have made it very clear about the need to restore calm. We have made it very clear that we condemn this action, and we will always look at what further steps should be taken.
Alan Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shireen Abu Akleh was a respected journalist, and I thank the Minister for her statement. As permanent members of the UN Security Council, I'm pleased at the role the UK played in securing unanimity in its condemnation. Does the Minister share my concerns of what this means to the Palestinian and Israeli community's relationship over the long term? And does she also agree that the best action in memory of Shireen Abu Akleh would be an open and transparent investigation participated by all parties?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right, and as I said in my opening statement, both those who mourn her and her herself should be treated with respect and dignity, and that is again another reason why this investigation needs to be so thorough. It needs to be deep, it needs to be fair, it needs to be impartial, and it needs to happen soon. We are very concerned about the escalating tensions that we've seen over recent weeks and months, increased violence, and it's really important to fight for that calm rather than see more violence.
Mr. Speaker, the reality remains that every time a Palestinian child is born, there is one certainty, that in life they will face persecution, oppression and humiliation at the hands of an occupying Israeli military. But the soul-shattering scenes we saw last week with the funeral procession of Shireen Abu Akleh, brutally attacked by the Israeli security forces, now means that they will be stripped of their dignity in death as well. Yet again, all the international community and this government does is offer empty words. So I ask the Minister, just what is this government waiting for? And why will they not immediately recognise the state of Palestine? And what message is this government sending to Palestinians who have now been stripped of their dignity in life and death?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we consistently call for an immediate end to all actions of violence. We immediately and continue to call against all actions that undermine the viability of a two-state solution. We also are a key development actor in the region, especially working to lift the overall standards of living for Palestinians and meet humanitarian needs. He asks about recognising a Palestinian state. We will recognise a Palestinian state at the time when it best serves the objective of peace, because achieving peace is our primary objective.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I draw the House's attention to my entry in the Register of Interests in relation to a recent delegation to Israel and the Palestinian Authority. As has already been stated, the Palestinian Authority have so far refused to participate in a joint investigation into the tragic death of Shireen Abu Akleh. An initial autopsy has found that it is not possible to tell whether she was killed by Israeli or Palestinian gunfire. Facts matter. So does my honourable friend agree that those who, for whatever reason, are jumping to blame Israel will only deepen division and make peace harder to achieve?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is really important that there is a proper investigation, a thorough investigation, a fair investigation, an impartial investigation. But I would also repeat again that we are concerned by the number of Palestinians who have been killed by Israeli security forces in recent weeks. And we urge thorough and transparent investigations into those deaths of civilians as well. It is really important that there is a restraint in the use of force, and we will continue to say that again and again.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A constituent of mine who went to school with Shireen Abu Akleh has been in touch to share her sense of helplessness at what seems to be yet another state-sanctioned killing in the occupied territories. And what she said to me at the weekend is that it seems to her that it's always incumbent on the Palestinians to prove their innocence and fight for basic human sympathy for the events that befall them. Now, I fully accept that the killing has to be investigated independently, but having regard to what followed, the raiding of the home, the appalling behaviour of the Israeli authorities at the funeral, can the Minister please answer the question that she was asked earlier? Will she summon the Israeli ambassador to communicate? Clearly, she feels outrage at what's happened, and she's been very honest about that. So will she summon the Israeli ambassador to communicate her outrage?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear that we have condemned this killing. We absolutely share her concern for the really distressing and disturbing scenes that happened at the funeral. We've called for a thorough investigation. We've called for respect and dignity, and we call for all parties to reduce the tensions and to come and work together towards peace. And delivering peace is what Shireen would have wanted and what we all want.
Michael Fabricant.
As the chairman of Labour Friends of Israel said earlier, this was in the middle of a gun battle between Israeli forces and Palestinian forces. The Labour Friends of Israel chairman is right. And my honourable friend, the member for Buckingham, is also right in saying that the initial autopsy, which was conducted by the Palestinian, not the Israeli authorities, but by the Palestinian authorities, said that it was impossible because the bullet removed was a 5.56 by 45mm NATO round used both by the Israelis and the Palestinians. Therefore, please may I ask my honourable friend, the Minister, to make sure and put pressure to ensure that this is an independent inquiry, because justice must not only be done, justice must be seen to be done.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is right about justice. Justice is really important. We absolutely condemn this killing, and we will continue to stress the need for this investigation to be fair, to be impartial, to be thorough and to be prompt.
John MacDonald.
I'm Secretary of the NUJ Parliamentary Group, and we've raised these issues before, but with regard to this killing, let's put it in the context of a systematic abuse of journalists, Palestinian journalists. The International Federation of Journalists has already, a month ago, referred these incidents to the International Criminal Court. Can I therefore say in that context, and also in view of the happenings subsequent to the killing, which were disgraceful, can I just repeat the question for the third time? Because the minimal action any government can take would be to call the ambassador in to express the concerns of this government about the Israeli state's behaviour. So can we ask for the third time, has the government, or does it intend to invite the Israeli ambassador to the Foreign Office for that discussion?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear about the actions that the government has taken to date. We continue to condemn this. We've called for an investigation. We've made it very clear through our ambassadors in the British Council in Israel and Jerusalem about our position, supporting the leaders to restore calm, the need to protect holy sites, the need for dialogue to move towards peace, and of course we always take any future measures under consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will have heard from across this House members calling for not just an impartial but an independent investigation. And I tell her why, and matters opposite, because already independent fact-checkers in this modern world have been able to put together compelling open-source evidence which points clearly to the responsibility of the Israeli forces for the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh. Given this, will the Minister confirm that it is the UK's official position that there should be an independent inquiry, not just impartial, so that both the Israelis and the Palestinians can have confidence in the outcomes? Will she clarify yes or no?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important that we work with partners across the world through the UN Security Council, and it is the UN Security Council's wording that is agreed between all of those countries that calls for an impartial investigation. Those are the wordings that have been agreed by the UN Security Council.
Mr. Speaker, I find the heartbreaking after decades of violence, illegal occupation, demolition of Palestinian homes, and complete disregard of the human rights, the UK has failed its obligation and duty to recognise the State of Israel. It took the Foreign Secretary more than 24 hours to put out a statement after the murder of Al Jazeera's esteemed journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. What message does that send to those responsible for Shireen's tragic murder? And in light of the history, why the government is not pushing for full independent inquiry? And given the close relationship between the UK and Israel, and now for the fourth time, will the Minister summon the Israeli ambassador to demonstrate the outrage over the behaviour of security forces during the Shireen's funeral?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Shireen's death was a true tragedy. We have condemned it. We have, as I said, on the 11th of May, the Foreign Secretary condemned it. We've also worked very rapidly with our colleagues at the UN Security Council to deliver that joint statement of condemnation and to call for the investigation that I have mentioned. We continue to press for peace, and obviously we saw those very distressing images at the funeral, and we'll always will look at what further steps should be taken.
Ray Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I refer to my register of members' interests, including being co-chair of the cross-party NUJ group and various Palestinian groups. I just want the Minister and members to imagine for a moment attending the funeral of a family member or friend. In what circumstances would it be reasonable or proportionate to see a pallbearer or pallbearers carrying a coffin? In the circumstances that we witnessed on our TV screens, how can it be acceptable for the police or security services of any nation to attack the pallbearers to the extent that the coffin falls on the ground? We call not only for her condemnation, but for a fifth time, I call on the Minister to summon the Israeli ambassador here to account for her actions.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've attended many funerals in my life from early childhood. That's one that will always stay with me. Mourners should always be treated with respect and dignity. Shireen and her family should have been treated with respect and dignity. We totally condemn her death and the manner in which she died. We believe that this really urgent investigation is needed in order to try and help rebuild peace. And that must be our priority.
Liz Roberts.
The International Federation of Journalists' complaint to the ICC over the treatment of Palestinian journalists is not only about protecting the human rights of journalists, but also about safeguarding their work they do as a profession to protect collective human rights. Now, the Secretary of State has talked on many times about the need for an independent and impartial investigation. In order to ensure that independence and impartiality, will she support the IJF's complaint to the International Criminal Court to ensure those very virtues?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we've been working with our friends and other members of the UN Security Council on that joint statement about the investigation. I don't have any other further details that I can share with her at this present time.
Zara Sultan.
Speaker, as if the ongoing dispossession and discrimination faced by the Palestinian people wasn't enough cruelty, Israel continuously targets Palestinian journalists. It is not only the murder by Israeli snipers of Shireen Abu Akleh, who for decades bravely reported the crimes inflicted on her people. Since 2000, Israel has killed an estimated 51 Palestinian journalists, and an independent UN Commission of Inquiry found out that during the 2018 March of Return, Israeli snipers intentionally shot Palestinian journalists who were clearly marked as such, killing Yasser Mutaja and Ahmed Abu Hussein. So what will it take for the government to stop equivocating over these horrific crimes, to hold Israel to account for its routine violations of international humanitarian law, and for the 7th time, will the Minister summon the Israeli ambassador?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we stand by journalists all across the world, and it is a tragedy that so many journalists have been killed in recent years, and in particular in this year. That is why we continue to raise issues of media freedom on a global stage. Back in February in Estonia, we announced support for the Secretariat for the Media Freedom Coalition. The Media Freedom Coalition, which we founded, now has 52 members, and we will absolutely stand for media freedom and for journalists all across the world.
Carol Monaghan.
Mr. Speaker, it is important that the Minister has condemned this killing this afternoon, and I thank her for doing that, as she has done several times. Many of us are puzzled by her reluctance to summon the Israeli ambassador. That would seem like the first step that should have been taken. Yeah. But will the government now commit to supporting the ICC investigations into this incident, but also into the wider behaviour of the Israeli Defence Forces in the occupied territories? Here.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only have we worked with other members of the UN Security Council in strongly condemning this incident and needing to have the investigation I've mentioned, but we have also been very clear that we're very concerned about other incidents of Palestinian civilians being killed by Israeli security forces in recent weeks, and we continue to urge for thorough and transparent investigations of those killings as well.
Andy Slaughter.
Mr. Speaker, another journalist is murdered in occupied Palestine. Next, the occupying power raids her family home, and then its forces brutally attack pallbearers and mourners at Shireen's funeral. In the light of that, the government's response has been pathetic and inadequate. The Minister won't even call for an independent, that is independent of the Israeli forces who have whitewashed previous deaths in this way. Will she do that? And will she just say this? What single step has the government taken, not said but done, to oppose the occupation of Palestine, which is at the root of this violence? Will they recognise Palestine? Will they ban trade with illegal settlements? Will they sign up to the ICC inquiry? Because if not, then her words are completely empty today.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I have said really clearly, we have led work at the UN to make sure that there is a joint statement, not just from us, but from the entire security. I am answering the question, sir. Please do not heckle me. Thank you. This is a tragic, tragic death. A really tragic death. And we have led the work at the United Nations to put the pressure on to make sure, to the best extent that we can, to make sure that this investigation happens, that it is fair, that it is transparent, and therefore, and the word that the UN has used, which I will repeat again because that's the word from that statement, is that it's impartial. We absolutely are very clear. He asked about the settlements. We are very clear. Settlements are illegal under international law. They call into question Israel's commitment to the two-state solution. We urge Israel to halt its settlement expansion. that threatens the viability of a Palestinian state, and we will continue always to press for peace.
Diane Abbott.
Does the Minister appreciate that everybody in this House regrets the killing of men and women in Israel, whether they are Israeli or whether they are Palestinians? And it is quite wrong to imply anything else. There has been talk of the necessity of establishing the facts. Does the Minister further appreciate that the facts of the terrible scenes at Shireen's funeral are beyond doubt? Millions of people around the world have seen those images. And finally, does the Minister understand that it's no use telling us that Shireen's death is a tragedy? We know that. We will only take her words seriously when she commits this afternoon in this House that she will indeed call the Israeli ambassador to the Foreign Office. Otherwise, her words are just words.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she is absolutely right that all deaths in this situation are a total tragedy, that what happened at Shireen's funeral should not have happened. I cannot give her any more comments at this point. I've told her what we're doing, and I have told her that ministers always look at what further steps can be taken. Our fundamental priority here must be to continue to urge for a de-escalation of tensions, an end to violence, and the pathway to peace.
Mohammed Jassin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The murder of Shireen Abu Akleh and the attacks on mourners at her funeral has shocked the world. It's not enough to condemn the actions, but to take actions. So when will the UK government stop authorising arms sales to Israel that we know are killing innocent Palestinians?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take the export of arms extremely seriously, and as has been said many, many times in this House, the United Kingdom has one of the most robust arms export control regimes anywhere in the world. The important thing now is to call upon all parties, and I hope you would all agree with me, to call upon all parties to de-escalate the tensions and work towards peace.
Christian Matheson.
Mr. Speaker, in her initial statement and in subsequent answers, the Minister has referenced her attempts to get a statement at the United Nations. The problem is that Israel has consistently ignored any critical statements coming out of the UN and has even sought to undermine the legitimacy of the UN and other international institutions. So why does she think this time will be any different?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important that voices from all across the world have condemned this awful deed.
Baladir Adit.
It's not the first time this has happened, and neither will it be the last. Under occupation, Palestinians' human rights are abused, and under occupation, as we've seen, they cannot even bury their dead with dignity. Does the Minister understand that until we have a lasting peace, we will not be tackling the solution at its very, very root? And does she understand that whilst the UK has committed to a two-state solution, you can't have two states if you only recognise one? So perhaps she would like to reconsider the answer that she gave to my honourable friend and tell us when exactly she is going to recognise the Palestinian state.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what is clear is that bilateral recognition by itself won't end the occupation. We need the parties to come to talks and work towards peace.
Nadia Whitty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh by the Israeli military and the subsequent attack on her funeral in Jerusalem demonstrated the realities of the occupation of the West Bank, which Amnesty International says constitutes apartheid as a crime against humanity, as defined in the Rome Statutes and Apartheid Convention. Will the Minister not only condemn this act of inhumanity, but also commit now to summoning the Israeli ambassador? Will she take steps to ensure that the UK ceases all arms trade with Israel and ensure that Britain is not complicit in the illegal occupation of Palestine?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've already stated many times the actions that we are taking, and that, of course, at all times, ministers look at what further steps might be taken.
Mark Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've had a great many letters from my constituents in Warwick and Leamington. I'm sure many others across this House have as well, since the brutal murder of Shireen Abu Akleh. They are saddened, they are sickened by the scenes of her funeral, what happened, and also they are deeply angry at the lack of reaction. So can I just say, will she confirm, I know she says impartial, but can she not just press the government to push for an independent investigation into the death? And can she place, please, on record before this House the dates of the meetings she's had with the Israeli ambassador and the agenda of those meetings, because we need to bring some sort of resolution and establish a two-state solution in that land.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the most important thing about this investigation is that it is for it to be accountable and for it to ensure accountability for those that carried out this act, so they can be held to account. And that is the most important part of this. That is why we've worked towards this wording to say it should be immediate, thorough, transparent, fair and impartial. But the most important thing is to get the accountability. I can't, from the dispatch box at this stage, tell you the meetings that I have had, as I am not the Minister for the Middle East, but I'm sure we can follow up with a member in writing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surely this appalling desecration of the funeral of Shireen Abu Akleh is evidence, if any more were needed, of the crime of apartheid that is being inflicted upon the Palestinian people, and which has been rigorously documented by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International and the Israeli human rights organisation B'Tselem. Instead of passing laws to ban local authorities and civil society from taking action against this brutal occupation, isn't it time to accept the legal analysis of these human rights organisations and do the right and moral thing and impose sanctions in response to this appalling criminality?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, so I'm afraid I need to disagree with the honourable gentleman, because we don't believe that boycotts, divestment or sanctions would help to create an atmosphere that would be conducive to peace. I note the word that he used of apartheid. We don't use that terminology, and we don't agree with its use because it is a legal term, and therefore a judgment on whether or not you can use that term and needs to come under international law by a judicial decision. And it's really, really important because it is a legal term. And actually, one thing I do agree with him, though, is that civil society always plays an important part in a democracy.
Tim Bonner.
Mr. Speaker, the sad reality is that the horrific murder of Shireen is just another tragedy in 74 years of unaddressed ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. And yet, rather than sanction Israel for this behaviour, 55 years after occupation began, the UK Government is busy strengthening relations with new trade deals. So I'll ask the Minister, for the first time, why won't she summon the Ambassador of Israel to the Foreign Office?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the most important thing that we need to do is try and work towards peace. And that is why we are working internationally, both for us to condemn this incident and internationally to condemn it. That is why we've called for this investigation. We want people to be held to account, and that is why we are working with our ambassadors and our British Council in Jerusalem, in Israel, to work to try and de-escalate tensions now, and that is the most important thing.
Ollie Lynch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We know that Shireen was wearing a press vest and helmet, yet in addressing the circumstances of her murder, an Israeli military spokesperson said they're armed with cameras, if you will permit me to say so. Will the Minister be unequivocal in her support for journalists and transparency in Palestine and condemn any sense that to carry a camera is to be armed, reaffirming that respect for a free press should be fundamental in any state calling itself a democracy?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom stands on the side of journalists all across the world, wherever they are. Media freedom is a vital part of our democracy and of our freedom as individuals, and we stand for journalists.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I declare an interest as a member of the Friends of Israel group? I also thank the Minister for her response. But can I, having seen innocent bystanders killed on numerous occasions in Northern Ireland, with similarities, as the Minister will know, being drawn between Nair McKee, who was killed by the new IRA as a journalist reporting on the unrest in 2019, and the victim in this case, Shireen Abu Akleh. Does the Minister not agree that the loss of life is truly tragic, and that all steps must be taken to ensure the safety of those who seek to report the news from an unbiased position? And what steps does the Minister feel her department can take to internationally send that message? Thank you.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we absolutely continue to call out attacks against journalists and media internationally, and he's also right to point out that attacks against journalists have happened in the United Kingdom in our history, and I remember that tragedy well. We are one of the leading countries in the world standing for media freedom. We founded the Media Freedom Coalition. It now has 52 members, and we'd like to see more.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I send my condolences to the family and colleagues of Shireen Abu Akleh. Can the Minister affirm that, contrary to the statement of the Israeli military spokesperson, just because a journalist is armed with a camera doesn't make them a target?
Journalists should never be targets.
Right, that completes the urgent question. Christine Jardine.